Hi everyone. In this video, we're going to discuss some of the psychological concepts that are related to thinking or cognition. And we've heard the word cognition a few times this semester. Basically, cognition refers to mental processes. So thinking about something, remembering something, knowing something, just internal mental processing. That's what we're referring to when we think about the word cognition, or just thinking more generally speaking. And what I think we want to start with is the idea that we think in concepts or categories. So from a biological perspective, think about how our nervous system, it's a network. You have one neuron connected to another neuron. There's a link or a connection there. And that's what brings about our thoughts and behaviors. In the learning chapter, we talked about how we learn through association, where we take one idea and it becomes connected to another idea. So we learn through connections, and that's going to be an important aspect of our problem solving, as we'll see in just a moment. But these words here, concepts, schemas, and categories, you've seen them before. So the idea of a schema, we talked about that when we discussed Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Piaget says that we think in organized structures. An organized understanding of something is a schema. So when I think of school, I might think of a teacher and a student and a classroom. All of these concepts fit into my schema. And that's the idea of my cognition. I have like these mental buckets, and when I take when an information comes my way, I take that information and try and fit it into a pre-existing category, or like a mental bucket. And if I have no mental bucket that works, I create a new one. I accommodate that new information. Okay, so you get the idea. We think in networks or categories, and we are extremely complex thinkers. Compared to any other animal, we are clearly the most intelligent. And a large part of intelligence, as you're going to see in the rest of this module, is problem solving, the ability to solve problems. So think about a problem you've solved recently. It may have been a simple problem, it may have been a complex problem, but typically speaking, we solve problems in two primary ways: algorithms and heuristics. And the way I think about these is there's a trade-off. The trade-off is speed versus accuracy. So algorithms, they are accurate. You could define an algorithm as a step-by-step problem-solving strategy that basically guarantees a solution. So it's accurate, but it's not very fast necessarily. It might be really slow, in fact, and I'll give you an example in a minute. A heuristic, on the other hand, could be defined as a mental shortcut. So heuristics are fast, but they're not necessarily accurate. So let's start with a basic example, a basic problem. Imagine you need orange juice. So you go to a grocery store, and this is a grocery store you've never been to before. So the problem you have is you don't know where the orange juice is located. So how am I going to find orange juice? So the first thing is you could use an algorithm. And an algorithm, again, it's a step-by-step process that guarantees the correct solution. So for this problem, what you could do is go down every single aisle and look at every single product, pick up every single product, read the label, until you find the one that says orange juice. So you're guaranteed to find the orange juice, because you're going to identify it by looking at every single product in the grocery store. It's very accurate. You'll definitely find orange juice eventually. But as you'll see, what I'm getting at here is that can take a really long time. Imagine if the orange juice was in the very last aisle. You'd be going up and down every single aisle. It could take you hours just to find orange juice. So we don't do that at the grocery store. Typically, we rely on mental shortcuts or heuristics. So I know orange juice is a beverage. So as I walk into this grocery store, I'm going to look around, and if I see beverages, I'm going to head in that direction because I assume that the orange juice will be located with other beverages. So it's a fast mental shortcut, but the problem is heuristics are not necessarily accurate. So imagine, for example, I see some beverages and I head in that direction, but it turns out that those are alcoholic beverages. I'm at the beer aisle or something like that. Orange juice may not be located with those beverages. So in fact, I made an error. In fact, a lot of our thinking is biased because we tend to choose shortcuts over accuracy because time is often of the essence when it comes to problem solving. All right, so speed versus accuracy. When it comes to algorithms, there's nothing more to really discuss. It's really just doing everything you possibly can, analyzing every bit of data that's available to you until you arrive at the accurate solution. When it comes to heuristics, psychologists, they have developed a number of different types of heuristic theories. In other words, different types of heuristics. And a number of them are described in the textbook. I want to simply describe a few of them here for you. The first is called the availability heuristic. An availability heuristic is where we make a decision based on whatever information is most readily available to us. And that information is not necessarily the most accurate information. So for example, imagine a person who smokes cigarettes, and they might convince themselves that cigarettes are not all that dangerous because maybe they have a relative who smoked, 2 packs a day and lived a really long life. So that's very possible. There are these anecdotes or, singular cases where people sort of defy the odds. They engage in unhealthy behaviors and still live a really long life. So if this was somebody you were related to, maybe it was your uncle, and you saw this person all the time, that information is going to be readily available to you when it comes time to make a decision about, should I smoke cigarettes or not? But the algorithm, in terms of deciding whether or not to smoke, would be to weigh all of the information. And obviously, there's plenty of scientific data to suggest that smoking is associated with cancer. And the problem here is that if I'm not, if I'm not sifting through scientific journals all the time, that information might not be as readily available to me when I'm trying to, make a decision or solve a problem. So that's the availability heuristic, making decisions based on information that easily comes to mind, as opposed to, what the actual empirical evidence suggests. I'm going to post a follow-up video about the availability heuristic, but I think one interesting consideration here is the news. Think about major news stories. And, one really tragic example is mass shootings. And it certainly seems like these are way too common right now. Just on a quick side note, it's just a horrific idea that innocent people can be, killed, going out in public and just thinking they're going to have a normal night. But, okay, that's aside the point. When events like this occur, they get a ton of news coverage. And as a result, viewers of these news programs, they might get a biased perception of how likely it is to die in a situation like a mass shooting. And, people do die in these circumstances, but the probability of that occurring is extremely rare. We are way more likely to die in a car accident, for example. But because when car accidents occur, the news doesn't really cover those, it's not like headline news, that information is not as available to us when it comes to deciding, for example, what to be afraid of. All right, so the availability heuristic, deciding based on what information is readily available. Let's just look at one more example of a heuristic, and that is called the representative heuristic. And this is basically stereotyping. The representative heuristic means making a decision based off of one piece of information, and you use that piece of information to sort of represent an overall idea. So sort of as a harmless, innocuous example, think about glasses. You might assume that somebody who wears glasses is intelligent. But that is kind of a biased perception, because really the only thing glasses tells you is that this person has vision problems. They don't have perfect vision. But we tend to associate glasses with being smart. And so we might use that one piece of information to represent something bigger, like somebody's intelligence. Now, this also has much more stronger implications, particularly in our society in terms of overarching societal implications and issues that we might be facing even today with skin color. So using somebody's skin color to represent, other aspects of their thoughts and behaviors. And one of the, I think, most important aspects of this is prejudice. And what we see is that this is basically information from a research endeavor looking at basically associating ethnicity with aggressive behavior. And what time and time again researchers have shown is that people will be more likely to associate a weapon with a black participant face as opposed to a white participant face. So over here we have what are called priming photographs. And researchers would show these faces, either a white face or a black face, to a research subject, typically on a computer screen. And then immediately after seeing either a white face or a black face, an object is presented. And the object could be either a weapon, like a gun, or a non-weapon item, like pliers. And your job would be to identify whether or not it's a weapon as soon as possible. And what researchers have shown is that people are faster at identifying weapons if they are first primed with the face of a black person. So what this is telling us is that there's an association with African Americans or black people in general and weapons. And obviously that is faulty logic, because to assume that just because somebody has this type of skin color, that doesn't tell us anything about their inherent behaviors. But again, we learn through association. Maybe it's the news sending us this message or who knows. But the idea is that's clearly biased. And that's the problem with a heuristic. Heuristics are mental shortcuts that allow us to make fast decisions, but unfortunately, fast decisions do not always mean accurate decisions. What's I think interesting to note about this research, by the way, is that both white subjects and black subjects both make these biased perceptions. So, for example, in shooting demonstrations, for example, in police training, where police officers have to shoot a suspect if they are holding a weapon and not shoot that suspect if they're holding a random object. Both white and black participants are more likely to make a mistake if the quote-unquote suspect is black. So, that's obviously a really hard-hitting example. There are plenty of, other examples that are not as hard, as like tragic to think about. But I think what's important to note is that we are biased thinkers. We don't always weigh all of the evidence. Psychologists use a term, cognitive miser, to summarize the way we think. A miser is somebody who's kind of like stingy with their money. Well, we are cognitive misers. And what that means is we often take the path of least resistance when it comes to our thought processes. We don't want to exert any extra effort if we don't have to, from a biological standpoint. Remember, from the biopsychology chapter, We are extremely efficient beings when it comes to our physiological processing. So we don't like to waste any effort. If we can make a decision as quickly as possible, we often will. But unfortunately, that comes at at a sacrifice of critical thinking. We need to be critical thinkers. That's really where algorithms come into play. To be a critical thinker means to weigh the pros and cons, or to weigh all of the evidence before making a decision. But oftentimes we take the speed versus accuracy, weighing that decision, we often choose speed. And so again, we are cognitively biased, and that has a lot of implications in a number of areas. So what you've heard here so far basically is that we think in categories. We think through networking, and the two major problem-solving strategies that we use are algorithms and heuristics, which have a speed versus accuracy trade-off.